Morning, Jaime. Morning.
Morning, Rabbi.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay. We are on 28. We're almost finished with the Perek. Very soon. Okay. The issue here of the Gemara, we're discussing mats that are used for schach, and which mats are permitted to be used for schach, and which, thank you, Anna, for setting it up, and which mats are not permitted to use for schach. So there was a whole discussion that the Gemara had yesterday and how to understand the Mishnah. The Mishnah on 19b brought a dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and the Tanakama regarding mats. Morning. And so yesterday we ended off on 28, and the Gemara said the following. The Gemara said that is the top of the page. If you look at the top of the page, the Gemara says, the Gemara says if you have a big mat, if it's made with Shiva, yes, good morning. Good morning, Dr. Navid. So the Gemara had said that if you have a large mat, everybody agrees that a large mat is made for schach. Generally, a large mat, the manufacturer, when people make a large mat, what are they making a large mat for? They're making a large mat to use for covering of huts. And therefore, since a large mat is made for use for covering of a hut, of schach, therefore, it's not mekabel tumah. Because we said a mat, if it's made for lying down purposes, if it's made for lying down purposes, it's considered usage for personal use of a person, and that will be susceptible to contamination. But if it's made for a ceiling of a hut, that's not mekabel tumah. Since it's wood, it's flat wood, it's not a container, it will not be subject to the laws of contamination. The only time we found that wood would be susceptible to contamination if it will be in a form of a container that could contain something, or if it's designated for lying down or sitting purposes, or else it will not be susceptible to contamination. And we said that the material that's needed for schach has to be a material that's not susceptible, that does not have the ability to become contaminated. So therefore, the Gemara said, Rava said that if you have a large mat, everybody agrees that a large mat is generally made for schach purposes. And since it's made for schach purposes, therefore, it's not made for lying down. A mat, remember, we're talking about a mat made out of reeds. Since the mat is made out of reeds, it's a hard substance. The hard substance is not so comfortable generally for lying down. And therefore, if it's made large, it's made for schach. And therefore, a large mat, the Gemara Rava wants to say, everybody agrees, a large mat, if you would go ahead and you would purchase a large mat, you could use it for schach. The issue would be if it's a small mat. A small mat, the Tanakama, the first opinion of the Mishnah held that a small mat is generally used for lying down purposes. And since it's used for lying down purposes, therefore it's invalid, because the fact that it's made for lying down, it makes it susceptible to contamination. And Rabbi Eliezer holds, and the dissenting opinion of the Mishnah, he holds that the average small mat is also made, if it's made out of reeds, it's also made to serve as the covering for a small hut, or to serve as a patch for small huts to get a certain, different sizes, a small size to fill a certain space. So therefore, he holds even a small mat is permitted to be used for schach. So according to this Gemara, now again, if you would specifically make the mat for lying down, it doesn't make it, this mat made out of reeds, it doesn't make a difference whether it is a large mat or a small mat. There's no argument when something is made specifically for lying down that it's invalid for schach, because it's made for lying down. So it will be susceptible, have the ability to contract contamination. The question here, we're talking about something called stam. Stam means where it was not specifically, we don't know what the purpose, what it was made for. It was made, you went to the market, you went in and you bought this mat. So the Gemara said that the argument will be by a small mat. What is the law if I go to the market and I buy a small mat? Is that small? How do we look at that small mat? Is that small mat able to contract contamination or not? And that's dependent how we understand the small mat is made for what purpose. Is it made for the purpose of a cover of a sukkah, or is a small mat made for a person to lie down on? So that was what the Gemara said before. And then now comes Abaye. We're now on 20a, on the first side of on the left side of the page, the middle paragraph. Amalei Abaye. Abaye is going to challenge this approach of the Gemara, because according to this approach, we are saying that Rabbi Eliezer is saying that a small mat has the same law like a large mat. That just like a large mat, we say it's generally made for, we look at a large mat, we say it's made for the purpose of schach. Rabbi Eliezer says a small mat is also, we also look at it that it's made for the purpose of a covering. So the Gemara says, Amalei Abaye. Abaye says, Ihachi. If it is true, if it is so, the way you understand, the way you're explaining the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer, Oma achas ketana, achas gedola. See, the Gemara is analyzing the order of the statement of Rabbi Eliezer. What did Rabbi Eliezer say in the Mishnah? He says, both achat ketana, both a small mat and both a large mat have a certain law. If he was coming to say that the small mat has the same law as the large mat, so he should have reversed the order of how he said it. He should have said both a large mat and a small mat have this law. But the fact that he says small mat has this law and a large mat has this law, would seem it seems to going in not in the direction the way the Gemara said. If you want to say that something is similar to something else, what would be the order of that you would say? You would say, same law that applies to A also applies to B. So, but the fact that he said both the small and the large, sounds like that the large is like the small, not that the small is like the large. So that's going to be one question Abaye is going to have on the way Rava explains the Gemara. Amalei Abaye. Ihachi, if that's true, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, achat ketana, achat gedola, he should have said achat gedola va'achat ketana miboyele. That he should have said both the large mat and the small mat have the same law. V'od, and furthermore, ki pligi bigdolu de pligi. You're telling me, you said there's no argument by a large mat. You told me a large mat is generally made for the purpose of a covering of a hut, covering of a sukkah, and therefore it's not mekabel tuma. It's not susceptible to contamination. Morning, Mr. Haber. And because of that, you could use a large mat for schach. There's no discussion. There's no dispute. That's what you said. So to that, the Gemara challenges. Abaye says challenge number 2. For Od, we found ki pligi v'gdolu de pligi. We found that there's an argument by a large mat. That's where they're arguing. The opposite of what you said. You said, the rabbi, Rava said, a large mat is no problem. If you buy a large mat, you go to the store, go to the market, and they're selling a large mat made out of reeds. You said everybody agrees you can use it for schach, but a large mat was made for the purpose of covering. But the Gemara says, I'll show you otherwise. I'll show you that they're even arguing by a large mat, that some large mats are made for people to lie down on. The Gemara says, where'd we find that? And Rabbi Eliezer is more strict, that he holds that even a large mat is problematic. Maybe people make it for the purpose of lying down. Where did he find that? The Tanya, we learned in a Braita. He found a Braita. What did it say? Marselet hakonim. If it was a mat made out of reeds, not a Persian comfortable mat. Well, I mean, they're not made out of reeds, they're made out of other materials. But even if it would be made, if we're talking about a mat made out of reeds, now it needed to be made out of reeds because in order for it to be possible for it to be used as schach, had to originally come from the ground, right? That's one of the things, one of the conditions for schach has to be gedule kang, has to grow from the ground. So this type of material, but if it's a reed material that grew from the ground, marselet hakanim, flax also, linen also comes from the ground, right? And it's not that level. It's not a reed material. It's a much softer material. So, but here we're talking about a reed material. So, marselet hakanim b'gdola. If it's a large mat, misaching above, the Tanakama says you could use it because the large mat is generally manufactured for the point of schach, for the point of covering. Since it's for the point of covering, it's not susceptible to contamination because flat wooden material that's not made for lying down is not susceptible to contamination. Therefore, you can use it for schach. However, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, im eina mekabelet tuma, only if it's not susceptible to contamination, meaning that you made it specifically for schach, then misach imba. The only time you could use it for schach, this large mat, is only if it was manufactured specifically for the purpose of schach. But if it was, which today's mats that people use for schach, where you have the hefsher, where you have the supervision, I presume that what the supervision is saying, one of the things that it's saying other things as well, but one of the things that it's saying is that the mat was made for schach.
Rabbi,
was not made for lying down purposes. Yes.
Do the ingredients that you're describing, reeds or wood or whatever, do they hold up if they're bound with something else? Does the binding change its composure?
Right. So the binding creates an issue because one of the things of the binding, if it's bound with something which is mekabel tuma, if it's bound with something that's able to receive contamination, we generally try not to support the schach with something. We try lechatchila with something which is able to receive contamination. So therefore, that's part of the hashgacha, also the supervision, to make sure what the type of item, what's the material they use to bound it. That's also important in the making of the schach. So that's also, that's what the hashgacha most probably is also telling you, that the materials they use because I think you get into issues if they use regular rope would be problematic. But I think they use certain types of materials, special.
But is metal wire does metal wire change the kashrut of it if it's just for binding?
The problem with the metal wire is metal is susceptible to contamination. So we would ideally stay away from it. And it doesn't mean if there's no other sukkah, if you have no other choice, or if you have no other sukkah to use, might not invalidate it, but it's definitely ideal to use other type of materials. So and the Hashgacha is going to say that the mats today are manufactured. They say they're made specifically for schach. So if they're made specifically for a covering for a sukkah, so therefore it's not going to be susceptible to contamination itself. The issue would be, like you said, we have to deal with what are the things that they're tying the mats together with. We want to make it a certain type of material that also is not mekabel tumah. The general, also generally we try wanting with Silverman. We don't rest the schach on metal.
Right, but if the binding of the schach itself is metal, I didn't realize that metal is mekabel tumah.
Yes, right. Right. So therefore we would definitely, ideally, lechatchila, stay away from it. I'm not saying that it will validate it, but it definitely we try. Maybe we'll look into the Yalkut Yosef in the next few days. We'll see what he says more about that. Discussion. So that's what the Hashgacha is going to tell you, that they're making the mats. So therefore, our mats today that the people are using today is made. Good morning, Mr. Silverman. Are made specifically for schach, not made for lying down. So comes Rabbi, because and we see there is an opinion here in the Gemara that we just found today that we did not have until now, that even a large mat, there is an opinion on record that says a large mat is also made for lying down, stomach, meaning in that without specific focus of what they're making it for, you tell the manufacturer, you call up the warehouse, you say, I want you to make me 1,000 large mats. And they're just making the mats. They're not, and they have no intention of what they're making. They're just making. We need 1,000 large mats. So what are those mats? Generally, that mat, what is it made for? What is a large mat made for? So this opinion, Rabbi Eliezer holds that a large mat is also made for lying down purposes. Therefore, if it's made for lying down purposes, he said you cannot use a large mat for schach, because if it's made for lying down purposes, we said that's the type, then it is susceptible, has the ability to receive contamination. So that's what the Gemara says. V'od ki pligi bigdolu de pligi. Rabbi Eliezer l'chumra. Rabbi Eliezer is more strict. The Tanya machselet akanim, the mat made out of reeds. Bigdola. The first opinion says if it's a large mat, no problem. If it's made out of reeds, was a large mat, we could say a large mat is made, generally it's made for covering schach, for covering of a sukkah. Rabbi Eliezer says, Im eina mekabelet tumah, if it does not receive contamination, misachim bo. If it doesn't receive contamination, you could use it for what? For schach. Only if you know that the large mat was made specifically for covering of a sukkah. But if you don't know what it was made for, it was just made. They call up the mat, make large mats. They're made also for lying down, and therefore you can't use a large mat unless it's specifically made for the purpose of covering of a sukkah. And like I said, that's
so
how a mat is made. What did you say?
So Abaye is more machmir.
Right. So Abaye is more machmir, because he found that Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Eliezer says that they're arguing by a large mat. Exactly. Now, Ella Amar Rav Papa. So Rav Papa says, how do you explain our Mishnah? Our Mishnah has an argument between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Eliezer, and we see from the Braita that everybody holds. We see from the Braita that they're arguing even by a large mat. So in our Mishnah, and how do you fit in that to our Mishnah? So he says, Elam Rav Papa, Biktana, and how do you explain? The Gemara had asked that the language of the Mishnah, the inferences of the Mishnah, were going in different directions. So the Gemara says he explains the Mishnah like this: Biktana kuliyama lo pligi destama l'shchivi. So he says, if it's a small mat, everybody agrees a small mat you cannot use for schach. The general small mat, unless it's specifically made for schach. You go to the market. If you say I want to buy a small mat, it's already post-manufacturing. It's not that you told the manufacturer to make it for covering of a sukkah. You went to the market, you're buying a small mat. We say a small mat is made generally for lying down. And therefore, Mr. Haber, you can't use that for schach. But, like someone said yesterday, unless they would say the small mat, they put in Walmart roof covering. They write on those small mats that clearly they made it for roof covering. But if they didn't write anything, they didn't write this is roof covering. They just wrote, here's small mat. You want to buy a small mat? You can't use a small mat according to everybody. But kipligi bigdola. But they're arguing by a large mat. When you go to Walmart, you say, I want to buy a large mat, a large reed mat. Can I use that reed mat? Doesn't say sukkah covering. If it says the large mat in Walmart, it says sukkah. Heck, I'm not passing. I'm just ideally, theoretically, that would be a good mat, because if it says sukkah cover, it's clearly not made for lying down. But when it doesn't say what it's made for, like we said, there's other issues. Maybe how they put the mat together. We wouldn't just go to Walmart and buy a mat. We would go to the sukkah depot or something with a supervision on the mat. But keep pligi bigdola. Tanna Kama sava stam gedola l'sichuf. The Tanna Kama holds that the average large mat is made for covering. Rabbi Eliezer sava stam gedola nami l'shchiva. That when you make a large mat, it's made both for covering and both for lying down. So now the Gemara says, so how do you explain the language of the Mishnah? So the Gemara says, "My asta l'shchiva," because Rabbi Eliezer said, what was the language of Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah? He said whether it's small or whether it's large. And by the way, now it fits in the order. He first says small, and then he says large. Why does it say small and large? Because he's saying that the large mat has the same law as the what? As a small mat. So therefore, that's the appropriate order to say. Whether you're small or whether you're large, you have the law of the large has the same law of the small, that it would be a problem. That it's not made, that it's not usable for schach. And so now when he says, but he says in the Mishnah, asol l'shchiva. But why does he say in the Mishnah, if you made it for lying down purposes? The language of the Mishnah says, if you made it for lying down, Rabbi Eliezer says, then it's mikabel tumah. It receives contamination. You just told me it doesn't have to be manufactured specifically for lying down for it to be a problem. You told me that if the large mat is made or the small mat is made, even without specific intention for lying down purposes, it's a problem. You told me it's just, even if it's labeled without any label, it doesn't say a lying down mat, it doesn't say a roof mat. You're telling me that it's a problem. So why does he say the word you made it for lying down is the problem? Even if you didn't make it specifically for lying down, it was just made without any specific intention, it's a problem. So why does he use the language, you made it for lying down? So the Gemara says, this is what he's saying. The average making it without intention, what you're making it for. When you make a mat, even a large mat, is also made l'shchiva, for lying down, ad avil sichot, until you make it for the purpose of schach, until you specifically make it with the intention for covering. So therefore, now let's fit it into the language of the Mishnah. If you look back at the Mishnah on Yutet Amud Beis on 19b, so he says like this: As achat tanach gedola, whether it's small, whether it's large, as sha'al shchiva, we treat the large or small mat as if it was made for lying down, and therefore it's mekabel tuma, it receives contamination, and you can't use it as schach. However, if you make it specifically for the purpose of schach, you made it clearly not for lying down, then you could use it for schach, and it's not mekabel tuma. Okay, so that ends that that piece. Tana Rabbanan. Now the Gemara is going to go into more discussion about the mats. Tana Rabbanan. Marcelet, yes.
Rabbi, I'm still having a problem with this idea of the intention. Where does the whole idea of like you have to have a certain machshava or intention for anything that you do? Where does this concept come from?
Very
I
good.
mean, here you have a mat. The whole idea of a sukkah is to have something that, fine, it shouldn't be made out of earthy material.
No, it should be made from material that grew from the ground. The schach has to be made from
Correct.
material that once grew from the ground.
From the ground, and it's supposed to give you the certain amount of shade. And zehu, that's it. It's 7 days, 8 days. That's really the purpose. Why are they making all these, like back in the days during the Gemara time? How do they know who had the intention when they made this stuff? There was no label on it. The guy made a mat. I could understand small mat was used for sleeping, fine. Large mat, maybe for sleeping, maybe for other stuff as well. So why the fact that it didn't have the intention? Why is the intention so critical? Where does this idea of intention in making things become such a big halachic decision?
If you look back on, very good, on the Gemara, the last line on Yud Gimel Amud Beis, on 13b, the last line of the page, where it talks about kelim. If you look the last line, it says, Kol kelim, and it turns to 14a on the top. Yordin l'dei tumah b'machshava. It says utensils. Good morning, boss. When do they able to become tamei? When is a utensil susceptible to contamination? It depends on your machshava. It's your mindset. What was the situation over here talking about? If somebody was making a utensil and he had in mind that at this stage of the process, the utensil is finished and it has use already. Let's say you could go ahead and make this for a table covering.
How come my machshava doesn't override his? I look at an object, I'm like, wow, that is amazing for my sukkah. I can't wait to put it on. This is the best dimension, and it could serve the best purpose. Why is someone else's machshava overrides what my mindset might be?
Right,
what my intentions are.
Because the second that the manufacturing process is over, once it's done, it's complete. If at that time it was completed, let's say it's not wood for a second. Let's move away from wood for a second. Let's say you're dealing with some other material, leather, or some other material. If once the manufacturer finished the processing and it was made for a specific use, once it's made for a use, it's called a keli, a utensil. So once it's a utensil, at that moment that the manufacturer finished making that product, at that moment it has the ability to contract contamination. You want to go ahead and you want to change now. So what change? You want to do something different now. You want to use it for something else, right? So let's say, for instance, let's talk about the wood, for example. Let's say the mat was made for lying down purposes. The moment that the mat was made for lying down purposes, it's susceptible to contamination. Now, if you want to change that, even if the question, issue number one is, maybe you have to do an action to remove it from being susceptible to contamination that you no longer, but even if you do an action, but once this item was susceptible to contamination, you can't use an item that was susceptible to contamination at one time in its history and now use it for Succah. So
what about
if you went to that store, right? You went to that store and you said, I'm using this sleeping mat as my Succah, but you using a sleeping mat as Succah. This had a history of receiving contamination. Once it had a history that it received, it had a history. It was in jail once. It has a history. Now here it has history that it was susceptible to contamination at one time. That's invalid. You can't use it, even if later on you did something to remove the ability of contamination.
Well, unless you changed it completely.
I'm saying,
what about if you changed it? What about if you change it? Exactly. Let's say I take this leather and I cut it up and it looks nothing like its original. My question, I understand the halacha that comes down from it, but where is this concept that where they said that once something is made and the manufacturer says done, it's considered this utensils. It's already labeled.
Because that's the Mishnah.
It's in a lot of Mishnahs, Rabbi Kelim. It's in Gitin, Gets. You have to write a Get Lishma. You can't write a Get and then give it to another woman. It's got to be written for that woman.
Right. But Dr. David is asking, where do we find that it's the mindset of the manufacturer that affects the creditor? So that's the Mishnah. Kol HaKelim. Morning, Daniel. Is that Jojo? Ezra. Kol HaKelim yordim l'dei tumah b'machshava. All utensils are go down to a susceptible contamination based on the intent of the of the tension. And the Gemara and the Mishnah states, and Rashi says, let's say you went ahead and you were making this, let's say, table cover, and you made this table cover, and thank you for coming by. And this table cover, at a certain point of the manufacturing, you could stop, and it's used as a table cover. But if you want, you could continue in the manufacturing, and bring it to a different level to make it used for. You can make leather sandals out of this material. So it says it depends if you had, it depends what the intention of the manufacturer was when
What's the source of that? I understand that. What's the source of that?
What's the source of the Mishnah?
Yeah, what is the source that says if your intention stops at point A and you're done is this? Where do they get this from, the Torah or from the oral Torah or written Torah? Like, where is this?
Okay, so we have to see the Mishnah. Let's see. Let's see if they quote
Sorry to go off.
No. It's very, very good. Okay, so that's really we'd have to look into in the Mishnah Aholot. So do some homework on your question to see where is the source from the Mishnah. We found the Mishnah, we found the halacha. The question is, where is the halacha based from? Where is the the source for this halacha? Okay, we'll do some homework on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so we got two pieces of homework. Okay. Now, the Gemara now talks about, I'm back to Chafam and Aleph 28, talks about other types of materials, other types of mats. So it says, Tana Rabbanan, Marcelet shel Shifa v'shel Gemi. A mat made out of Shifa or Gemi. Gemi is, now Rashi says these type of materials are soft, a softer type of materials. And they also, the way these are plants, these are also, they grow by the water. They're not as tough and hard as reed material. And therefore we say since they're softer, so the average small mat that's made out of this gemi or the shifa is made for the purpose of lying down. So therefore we say, if it's shel shifa v'shel gemi, so if it's a small mat made out of this softer material is made for lying down. So, but if it's gedolah, if it's a large mat of this type of material, so large mat misachim bo. You could go ahead and use it for schach. Ketana a misachim bo. So if this is a small mat, you can't use it. It's too soft. It's used for lying down. But if this is large, this type, even though the chidush is, even though it's a little softer, so you might have thought that maybe it's generally used for lying down. But the first opinion says it's fine if it's large, and if it's small, it's a problem. We'll see tomorrow. We'll continue more about these type of mats. Want to wish everyone a great day. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Mold on it. Can you still use it?
If what got on it?
You get mold on the bench.
Have a great
Yes,
day,
you
Reddy.
can still use it. If it gets mold, you can still use it, but it's not, might not be hidur mitzvah. Might not be beautifying a mitzvah. You want to do a mitzvah nicely. Right? And therefore if it has mold, you know. No, I like you know, all different.
It's based on so many things
Yes.
in every day.
Morning, Simon. So good to have you. Thank God. How are you?